All right, all right. Like I said, we have a short week coming up. Okay, so let's get into it. What do we have? Okay, we have breads, and more breads. Okay, welcome to Bread Week. Yeah, we got to make a lot of bread this week. Okay, breads and bread doughs. We're going to be talking about the sunflowers too. Okay, so breads, yeasty breads. The basic dough ingredients: you got flour, bread for crispy crust and chewy crumbs. Whole grain results in denser, more hearty texture, complex flavor. All purpose for softer, more tender types. Water. Okay, keep this in mind. Your water, when you're making your breads this week and next week, it has to be sitting between 90 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. 90 to 110 degrees. Usually the hot water from the tap is sitting at 110 degrees, guys. Okay, so read your recipe, and if it doesn't say the water needs to be between 190 to 110, it needs to be between 90 to 110 degrees. Very, very important. Okay. Yeast. We're going to be talking about different kinds of yeast. Okay. All provide the same leavening in different amounts. We got fresh yeast, cake yeast, active or dry instant. Okay. Salt. The main purpose is to control fermentation, so it doesn't grow out of the pot and goes, "Feed me, Seymour." That was a good movie. Anyways, also gives it flavor. When you bite into a bread, if it's overproof and huge, that probably says that you don't have enough salt. And when you taste it, it's gonna be salt-free kind of bread. Okay, so salt, very important. Here's the different kinds of flours. You got cake or pastry flour. Okay, for cakes and cookies, you got all-purpose for bread and bread rolls, bread flour, dark wheat breads, mixed wheat breads, high gluten flour, Italian double O flour, 00 flour, okay, white rye flour, and also rye flour. Have you guys gone shopping yet for your flours ingredients? Did you guys know? Okay. So the best kind of flour for focaccia is the double O flour. We're gonna be making. I'm gonna be making both of them. I'm gonna be making tomorrow the double O and using bread flour for the Polish for Wednesday. Okay, so you can find it at the store. It's a little bit more expensive, but it does exist. Double O flour. Okay. Zoom a little bit. Okay. Really? Well, how do you know? Okay. Anyways, we're making the recipes that include yeast. You need to add a lukewarm liquid, usually water or milk. Okay, so again, water needs to be between 90 to 110 degrees to activate the yeast. Even though it's active yeast, still need to activate it because you never know, the yeast may be dead. Okay, it is important that you get the temperature right, since the cold water won't get that yeast going, and hot water will kill it. Yes, yeast is a leavening agent. What makes the bread rise? So it needs to be alive before the dough is put into the oven, where the yeast dies due to the high temperatures. An active yeast converts the sugars into the dough into carbon dioxide, which causes the dough to rise and create bubbles after the dough has risen. And lukewarm water activates the yeast. Once again, I emphasize, water needs to be between 90 and 110 degrees. If you're not using a thermometer, run the water until it feels comfortably warm and no longer cold, making sure the temperature is consistent. If you're uncertain, it is better that the water be cooler rather than the warmer, because hot water will kill yeast. If your water is sitting at above 110 degrees, it will kill your yeast. If it's colder than 90 degrees, it's not going to activate your yeast. Again, reemphasize 90 to 110 degrees. Okay. Depending on whether you are using active dry yeast or instant yeast, you will handle the yeast activation differently. Active yeast needs to be initiated by mixing it with lukewarm water. Okay. Red Star Active Dry Yeast recommends hydrating the yeast in a liquid that is between 110 and 115. 110 is good. Anything above that is going to kill your yeast. Okay. What else? When using the regular baking recipes, and if using a bread machine, the liquid temperature should be at about 80 degrees. Instant yeast, also called fast-acting rapid yeast and fast rising, does not require any mixing with lukewarm water. Instead, The dry yeast is added directly to the dry ingredients in the recipe. However, if you like to give the yeast a good start, you can add it to 1/2 cup of lukewarm water, and it has to be mixed with 1 teaspoon of sugar. Stir until dissolved, then just let it set it until the mixture begins to foam vigorously. And I will walk you guys through that process when we go to the recipes, which should take between 5 and 10 minutes. Important thing to note, however, is that if you choose to use lukewarm water with instant yeast, you need to decrease the total liquid to recipe by 1/2 cup to account for the water you're adding in your yeast. Okay. So here we go, different kinds of yeast, guys. Okay. So they get confused. We got baker's yeast. Okay. Active dry yeast. This is normal yeast. The yeast can be blooming water to jumpstart the activation. We'll need about 2 rise steps in the recipe. Number 2, you got instant yeast. Okay. This is what we have at school. The yeast is specially formulated to activate more quickly. This yeast does not need to be bloomed in water. It can tolerate just 1 rise step in this recipe. Even if you have this yeast, still bloom it in water, because you never know, the yeast might be dead. Okay. And number 3, rapid rise yeast or bread machine yeast. Both of these yeasts are similar to instant yeast. These granules are usually smaller than and more round to work better in the bread machines. And you got fresh yeast. This one I used to buy it frozen. It looks like a little block of butter. Okay? This is a wet compressed yeast that is ideal for many baking applications. It is not very common because it is not shelf stable. It can be used in small recipes that call for dry yeast. Okay? And you got number 5, packet or dry yeast. Okay? 1/2 teaspoons or dry yeast, or 2 ounces of fresh yeast. Those are your different kinds of yeast. Okay? And again, fresh yeast, also called compressed yeast, usually purchased 1-pound cakes. Again, looks like a block of butter. Okay? And again, active dry yeast and instant yeast. Okay? So be careful what kind of yeast you guys got. Okay? So again, what type of yeast is better for your bread? Active or rapid rise, fresh or instant? Find out which yeast is best for your homemade bread recipes. Any baker knows that making bread can be a tricky business. It requires little extra time, little elbow grease, all that kneading, and some extra know-how, especially when it comes to yeast. Yeast is responsible for the lovely rise of a loaf of homemade bread, plus some of the delicious flavor, but when working wrong. But sometimes the biggest challenge is making the bread is knowing exactly what kind of yeast to choose in the first place: active dry, instant, or rapid rise. Okay? Active dry yeast. When it comes to baking bread at home, most recipes call for active dry yeast. This type of yeast comes out of a package looking like small tan granules, roughly the size of poppy seeds. In this state, the yeast has long shelf life, so long that it keeps it in dry, cool place. Also must be airtight. If you had a big open container of yeast, open it, use whatever yeast, and close it airtight. You're going to leave it exposed to the air, it's going to die. It's going to die. That's what I said. Be careful. You got to bloom the yeast. Make sure it's alive. It's not dead. But when you open it, seal it airtight. Otherwise, it's going to dry. Okay. So when it comes to breaking breads at home, most recipes call for active dry yeast. Okay. In this dormant state, active dry yeast requires warm water to activate the little organisms that give your bread its lift. After the yeast starts to come alive and bubble up, the mixture is added to the rest of your bread recipe. Okay. And again, instant yeast also is a popular option for everyday bread baking, also known as rapid rise, quick rise, or even bread machine yeast. Instant yeast is sold in small packages or jars and is appropriate for everyday bread baking. You can easily substitute instant for active dry yeast in most recipes. The major difference between instant yeast and its active dry cousin is that instant yeast does not need to be proofed in water. Okay? I still say, guys, even if it's instant yeast, still proof it, because you never know, the yeast must be dead. It might be dead, so better to proof it if you see if it's not or not. If it's not, it doesn't bubble up or foam up, get rid of it and start new, grab new yeast. Okay. Anyways, the granules, small and active dry yeast, can be incorporated right along with your dry ingredients. Fresh yeast, less common is fresh yeast. You can find this option in some groceries dairy sections, though it's sometimes difficult to find. Sold in small cakes or bars, fresh yeast has the texture of crumbly eraser. It also has much shorter shelf life than its packed red cousin. There are actually some same organisms, some of the same, since the same product is perishable, it must be refrigerated and used within 2 weeks. To use fresh yeast, you must be crumbled into small pieces and proof, just like you do active dry yeast, okay? And I said I used that before, and it comes in 1 pound blocks, okay? So guys, you got a osmotolerant yeast. If you plan on baking an exceptionally sweet dough, think cinnamon rolls, danishes, or brioche, you should consider using an osmotolerant yeast. Sugary doughs that take a long time to rise because they are so heavy, they got sugar and other ingredients too. Or just plain don't rise much at all. So sometimes a special form of yeast is necessary to get the light and airy breads. So sometimes we don't have the yeast. I always tell my students, use twice the amount of yeast, especially when you go into regional cuisine. You're going to make tomato bread. It has Parmesan cheese and tomato juice and water. It's too heavy. So I always tell them, use 2 times the yeast, and it proves that real nicely. Especially yeast isn't always readily available at your local grocery store, and when it is, it's likely not labeled as osmotolerant, right? Instead, look for a SAF Gold Instant Yeast, and I saw it yesterday at HEB. When you're shopping in store online, also worth noting, this yeast is more expensive than your standard packets. Yes, it is. I saw that. I was like, If you're not interested in the investment of a large container like one on there, you can always use more common instant or active dry yeast. Just increase the amount by 30%. Nutritional yeast, another one. When shopping, you must come across nutritional yeast. This type of yeast is not for baking. Nutritional yeast is deactivated yeast, commonly used as a health supplement. It's high in B vitamins. Occasionally, this yeast product is also used to season foods with its nutty flavor. Just like you can't use nutritional yeast in baking, you cannot use baking yeast in nutritional supplements. You cannot use vice versa. Ingesting that much yeast can be dangerous. Imagine that yeast sitting in your stomach. It's going to ferment. It's going to bubble up. Okay. So the 12 steps in yeasty dough productions. First, you got to scale the ingredients. You got to measure them. Make sure they're correct. Make sure you have a scale. Make sure you scale it to the right amount of the recipe calls for. You got to mix the ingredients and knead them. We're going to be making bread by hand. Okay. Fermentation. You got to let it ferment. Degassing. Some of the bread needs to be degassed, but not baguettes. Okay. Scaling, portioning. How to measure it in the scale of how much each French bread is going to make, how much focaccia, you got to scale it. The rounding, pre-shaping, and bench rest. Bench rest, sometimes we proof them again, we call it a second proof, okay? Makeup and panning, so when you shape it, put it in a pan, okay? Proofing again, so it takes about 2 proofings. Baking and cooling, so the breads are going to take 2 kinds of proofing. The first one after the dough is made, and the second one after this is properly shaped, okay? And storage, okay? You must make sure your scale or measure your ingredients correctly. You were doubling or cutting the recipe, make sure all ingredients match and they're the right amount, okay? Wait, go back, okay? So we got different kinds of dough types. We got lean, low in fat and sugar, and strong too, and rich, higher in fat. Sugar may contain eggs. Really, what happened to this? My slide got all mixed up, okay? Well, let me there. Anyways, here we go, okay? Enriched doughs, higher in fat, sugar may contain eggs, weaker flour too. Pre-ferment uses a sponge starting dough, sponge autolyse method of mixing, okay? So your enriched dough is going to be your challah bread. Okay, that's an enriched dough, okay? Your lean dough is going to be your baguettes, okay? Really? Again? What the? Let me move these things around so I can. Okay. Next one. So mixing methods. You got straight dough. All the ingredients are together. Mix in 8 to 10 minutes. A window pane test. So when you do the window pane test, it's going to be the one here on the right hand side. Okay. So when you put all the ingredients together, mix for 8 to 10 minutes, you're going to grab a piece of that dough. You're going to stretch it. Okay. Until you see sunlight coming through. Okay. That's window pane test. Modified straight dough, blend fat, sugar, yeast, spices, add liquid eggs, alternative with flour. Switch to dough hook, plus minus 5 minutes, add the rest of the ingredients. Sponge method, yeast, water is part of the flour blended. Okay, Sponge ferments, and then it's an ingredient, proceeds straight for the dough. So this is what the window pane test looks like, guys. Let me move things around here because you got out of sight. Okay. So that's what the window pane is all about. So when you make your dough, grab it and stretch it. If you see sunlight coming through, you have the window pane test. If not, you got to keep on kneading it until it has that window pane test. Okay. So proper fermentation, it's long and slow. Fermentation is increasing flavor. Okay. Retarding versus room temperature versus proofer. Retarding is when you make the dough overnight, let it retard for the next day. Okay. You're slowing it down. Okay. Usually until double in bulk. You're also going to test it. Dough is still fermenting while you portion or pre-shape. So when you're still working with it, it's still fermenting. Be mindful of the skin. Okay. Lightly greased plastic helps. Okay. So when you're going to let your dough rest, cover it. Otherwise, it's going to form that skin on top. And we don't want that. Okay. Shaping pointers. Flour should be used sparingly. Sparingly. So when you see you flour your table, don't dump 2 pounds of flour. Just lightly sprinkle it. Okay. Dough has all the flour it needs. Okay. Give it some bench rest. Set it on the bench. Let it rest. Allow gluten to relax after pre-shaping. Okay. Move it gently to retain shape and avoid stretching or tearing. Okay. You don't want to stretch or tear. It's not Play-Doh. You're not going to do the window pane test. Okay. Proofing. Okay. Without a proofer at home. This is how you proof without a proofer at home. I don't have a proofer at the house too. So here on the right-hand side picture, okay, I like to proof if the oven is not on yet. Okay, we have more than one oven. You put your dough in a bowl. You wrap it in saran wrap. You mark it on the outside of the saran wrap. This the shape of the dough. You boil some water. Put it in a pan. Put it underneath the dough on the rack. Okay. That hot water is going to create steam. It's going to act like a proofer. It's going to proof your dough bigger. Okay. Also, too, hear me expand this one. Okay. Okay. This is the microwave proofing method too. So you got 2 proofing methods. Okay. If you don't have a proofer at home, if your oven is not on, you can proof it in your oven, or you can also proof it in your microwave. Okay. Grab your dough, wrap it, grab a little container of hot water, boiling hot water. Put your wrapped dough in the microwave. Put your container of hot water in the microwave. Do not turn it on. It's an enclosed container, and that steam is going to proof your bread. Okay. So life hacks: how to proof your bread without a proofer at home. Okay. So proofing accelerates a form of fermentation. Okay. Usually higher temperature humidity. Okay. The oven doesn't need to be on. Neither does the microwave. If your oven has the pilot on, you got a pan of hot water. Sit that hot water right above the pilot light. That heat is going to keep the water nice and hot. It's going to create that steam. Okay. So when baking, when you check your bread, if you don't know how to check it, it needs to be golden brown on the outside. Okay. And you also need to check the temperature with a thermometer inside the bread. Yes, that is correct. It needs to read between 195 and 200 degrees. If it does read between those 2 numbers, your bread is done. Take it out, let it rest. Okay. Also, color is an indicator. It needs to be that golden brown crust. Okay. Make sure it's done. Avoid grocery store pale color bread. You know what I'm talking about? The one you have to buy the store in the frozen section, and then you put it in the oven and it gets all brown. Avoid that kind of bread. It has to be a nice golden brown. Okay. And when you pick it up, it needs to be hollow. Okay. When you thump it, it needs to make a sound. Okay. Cooling and storage. Cooling is important for proper storage. It will sing as the bread is cooling on the wire rack. Gases are still escaping. You put your ear right next to it, you can hear that whistle, that singing, but the gas is still escaping. Okay. Never wrap a hot loaf. Never wrap a hot loaf. Okay. Why? Because they still has some residual steam. It'll make it soggy, and also make it go bad faster. It'll get moldy. Never refrigerate. Promotes staling. It's going to get stale faster. Freeze it. You're going to wrap it very well. Aluminum foil is frozen better, okay? But it needs to be cooled down first, okay? So on your bread, when you get it out before we get to laminate doughs, you need to cut it on the cutting board with the serrated knife, straight, even sides. Not at an angle like this, not at an angle like that, straight. The knife has to be evenly, okay, all the way down, back and forth, okay? Do not use your chef's knives. You're going to smoosh that bread because you use chef's knives. You're going to turn cut this when it go inside like that. Okay, so don't try to use your serrated knife. Okay. Laminated doughs. We're going to make some blitz dough coming up next. Okay, in the next few days. So what is a laminated dough? Laminated dough is made with 2 amounts of fat, typically butter, a lot of butter that are incorporated into the dough in different ways. The smaller amount is blended into the dough. So you got two types of butter. One is made into the dough, and the larger amount is formed into a block or packed and then folded into the dough in the layers. Okay. After the butter is incorporated, you lock it in. The dough is given turns or folds, which make hundreds of flaky layers for the finished product. So we're making puff pastry croissant. You make the dough with the ingredients, you let it rest, you bring it out, you roll it till about maybe I don't know, what is it, 12 by 6 by 12 rectangle sheet, okay? And then you go ahead and put the cut up your butter, put it inside, fold it in, okay? And then press lightly with your rolling pin, okay? And then fold it again. Put it in your refrigerator for about half an hour till the butter solidifies. Bring it out and press it again and roll it, and then fold it again. It makes different layers. So when we make croissants, I usually tell my students to go 4 layers, no more than that. Some want to go aggressively. They want to go 6, 7 layers. No, you can't. It takes too long, especially in the hot summer days where it's too hot in the kitchen. You can't work with that dough. The butter's going to melt and it ooze out of the dough. Okay. Sponge method of rich doughs. What is the sponge method? Method of mixing bread dough that provides flexibility in scheduling bread production by making part of the dough separately and allowing it to ferment. Typically the yeast, all part of the liquid, and all part of the flour mixed together by hand and is set aside to rest, covered at room temperature. Okay, that's the sponge method. Both will help in the Ziploc baggies. They will hold in a Ziploc baggie, but you got to be careful. Use a large enough Ziploc baggie because that dough is still going to keep on growing and it's going to pop that Ziploc baggie. It's going to ooze out. Okay. After the sponge is fermented, sponge becomes an ingredient. Proceed as a straight dough method for mixing. Bulk fermentation follows along with the remaining normal steps for dough production, and they are okay. This is your you're going to be using this on tomorrow for the next day. We're going to be making a focaccia straight dough tomorrow, and we're going to make a biga for the next day. Okay. So type of sponges. Biga is Italian, Polish in Polish, Barm in English, pâte fermentée in French, mother and chef here in the States. That's what we call it. Okay. So Polish is basically water, flour, and yeast. That's the first picture that you see here. That's what it should look like. I mean, biga. The second one is Polish. Third one is barm, and the fourth one is pâte ferment. Okay, all have the same purpose, but have a different textures and breads, and they all have different characteristics. So we are going to be making the Polish tomorrow. Okay, we're going to go with the recipes, so don't get confused. It does call for water, flour, and yeast, one part, and the next part has the actual recipe for the bread. Okay. Again, rich dough is higher in fat and sugar. Okay, eggs often is present. Softer slack dough, sticky to handle. Be careful of too much flour on bench. Often use the sponge method. Okay. So your menu for Tuesday. You are going to be making focaccia that day. Okay. You're also going to make soft yeast dinner rolls, and you're going to make the focaccia Polish for the next day. So you're going to make 2 focaccias, one for the day of, okay, and one for the next day. Okay. So focaccia, you can go crazy in decorating your focaccia if you have the ingredients, like you see the picture here on the top right, left-hand side, okay? Let me go back, okay? Those are chives, bell peppers, tomatoes, onions, garlics, okay? You want to make it look like a little flower bouquet-ish type of deal with the focaccia, okay? On top. But we're looking for the focaccia to be like this middle pictures right here. Saturated with olive oil, in the dough, out the dough, under the dough. Nice and golden brown, nice and airy and fluffy. Okay, not to be dense, not to be thin. We want nice and thick, like a Sicilian pie pizza. Okay. You're also going to be making soft yeast dinner rolls tomorrow. Okay. Here we go. You can put them in a pan. You can put them in a muffin tin. You can put them in a sheet tray. You can put them in a cake pan and make monkey bread. Your choice. Soft yeast dinner rolls coming up tomorrow. Okay. So the recipe for the focaccia, this is it for tomorrow, okay? It's not in the portal. If I were you, take a picture, because we're going to be making this recipe. If you have double loaf flour, if not, bread flour will do too as well, okay? This dough does not need to ferment for the next day. We don't need to make a poolish for the next day, okay? So it has double loaf flour. Yes, it does exist. Let me show you what it looks like, okay? Okay, guys? I found out the store, yes, I'm like, yeah, I went looking for it. Okay, and this is what it looks like. So yeah, double loaf flour, 18 ounces, okay? Granulated sugar, 1 tablespoon. Active yeast, 1 tablespoon. Kosher salt, 2 teaspoons. I'm probably going to use, maybe I'll use 18 ounces. We'll see. Okay. Combine the sugar and the yeast and water. Again, the water needs to be between 90 and 110 degrees. Stir to the solid yeast. So whisk the yeast in the water. It's going to look like dirty water. Okay. Cover the bowl. Okay. And let it foam up. Activate the yeast. Then you're going to stir in the sifted flour with a spoon. You know, the flour mixed with 1 teaspoon, half a teaspoon of salt, 4 ounces at a time until you make that dough. Once the dough is done and knead it, place that dough in an oil bowl. Why do we place it in an oil bowl? Because you don't want that dough to stick on the side of the bowl, okay? So we want to make sure we put it in an oil bowl. What else? Cover and ferment until it's double. So when you wrap the bowl, here's the bowl on the side, right? Top view. You're going to wrap it and Sharpie it. Mark it with a Sharpie, the size of the dough inside. Let it rest, covered, and the dough is going to grow. So when you look at it from the top view, here's the initial marking of the Sharpie, and the dough is going to be on the outer edges of that Sharpie marked drawing, okay? What else? Mark the saran wrap with the top of the Sharpie to trace the size of the dough. Dough should have extended paths of Sharpie markings. Work the dough, then flatten onto an olive oil sheet pan. It should be no more than 1 inch thick, okay? So when you flatten it, you want to make sure that you use the right sheet tray or cookie tray big enough for that dough. If it's too big, you don't want to flatten and stretch it all the way because it needs to be the same shape of that sheet tray, okay? So don't stretch it too thin, okay? What else? Brush the top of the dough with olive oil. So the bottom needs to have olive oil in the dough, and then top, brush with olive oil. Let it proof until it's doubled in size, approximately 15-20 minutes. Sprinkle the remaining salt on top of the dough, and then bake in a 400-degree oven until it's lightly golden brown. It takes about 20-30 minutes, okay? But it's going to be preheated. So that is your recipe for tomorrow's focaccia, okay? But let's take a look at, real quick, okay, at focaccia, okay? The technique, how to make it by hand, right? Here we go. I'll pop the link in the chat too. Okay.
This is the story of the cult
Really?
favorite, best-selling, waitlist-inducing Always Pan. I created the Always Pan because I was sick.
This is for the next day. Okay. You're gonna make the poolish first. So poolish on Tuesday for Wednesday, okay? And then on Wednesday, you're gonna mix the final rest of the ingredients to make that dough. Elbow grease, be ready. And at this point, you're gonna mark the saran wrap on top of the shape, the size of the dough, and let it ferment. And the dough's gonna get bigger than the markings of the Sharpie. Okay, that you know when that is done. See how the dough expanded? In the bottom, instead of cornmeal, it needs to be olive oil in the bottom. And if you don't have a cookie tray that is big enough for that dough, a round cake pan will do the job as well too. It's going to be a round focaccia, it's not going to be a square. So as long as you have the pan big enough for your dough, you can go ahead and use it. Okay, it needs to be like I said, cake pan or a sheet tray. Okay, and olive oil at the bottom, adequate amount of olive oil. Really? Jake from State Farm?
Jake from State Farm, it's the least I can do.
And then whatever toppings you want on your focaccia, okay? Your choice. And more olive oil. You're gonna use your fingers to make dimples. Punch it up with your fingers, okay? There you go. And then more olive oil on top of that too. Your focaccia needs to have those dimples. You can put onions, you can put garlic, you can put anything you want, okay? It's almost like a pizza. Almost. And more olive oil, again. And when you cut it and squeeze it, you need to be able to squeeze the olive oil out of it. It needs to be totally saturated, okay? So that's your Polish method for tomorrow for Wednesday. That is for Wednesday, okay? Now let us go over the one for tomorrow, okay? The one for tomorrow is we're gonna be making it a day up for tomorrow, okay? Just, this guy has some corny jokes.
We love the new apartment.
There is a bit of a clogging problem.
Come on.
At least Geico makes it easy to bundle our renters and car insurance.
For bundling made easy, go to geico.com. Chef John from foodwishes.com.
This is for tomorrow.
Focaccia.
Okay.
That's right. I can't believe I have not made this yet. It is so easy, so delicious, and extremely dimpled. And unlike the chin of your favorite action movie star, these dimples are not just for looks. They're going to serve several very important purposes. But you know what? We're getting ahead of ourselves. Before you can dimple dough, you have to make dough to dimple. So that's where we're going to start here. We're going to add 1 package of dry active yeast to a bowl. And then we're going to pour over a cup of very warm water. You want to shoot for about 105 degrees. And that's going to ensure that yeast starts growing at a nice rapid rate.
And again, that's how you activate your yeast. 90 to 110 degrees water, mix it very well, looks like dirty water. Cover, you can let it see foam up.
All right, so we're going to take our whisk, give that a nice stir, and then we're going to add some more stuff. The first of which would be some olive oil. And this is just going to be the first of many olive oil additions in this recipe. There is a lot of olive oil in this, which is just one of the reasons it's so good. We're also going to need some salt, of course. And then I'm going to dump in some semolina flour. Don't worry, you have a little bit.
No, we're not going to use semolina. We're going to use, for this one, we're going to use a 00 flour for tomorrow, okay?
The back of the cupboard from when you try to make pasta. Okay, so we're going to give that a mix with a whisk. And then we're going to add something that's an optional ingredient. If you're doing plain focaccia, you don't have to do this. But I'm going to toss in some finely minced rosemary, which I think is quite beautiful in this. And then last but not least, some bread flour. And then all we need to do is grab a wooden spoon or a spatula and mix this in the bowl until it sort of comes together into a thick, sticky dough, and it becomes just too hard to stir. And at that point, we're going to dump this onto our work surface and start the kneading process. Okay, so make sure your hands are very well floured. And we're going to go ahead, we're going to start kneading that dough. And it's going to be too wet, too sticky when you start. But as you do this, every time it gets too sticky, too hard to work with, you'll simply give it another dusting of flour. All right, not too much, just enough to knead it. Generally better to have your dough a little too sticky than a little too dry. I think that goes for most bread making in general, but especially with focaccia. And as soon as we knead it smooth, and it just starts to get a little bit elastic, and it looks something like that, which probably took about 2 or 3 minutes
Texture needs to be tacky but not sticky, okay?
of kneading to achieve. We're going to stop and we're going to knead in some olive oil, right? So the original base of the dough has olive oil, but we're also going to introduce a couple tablespoons during this kneading process. So I'll do this in 2 additions. I'll drizzle over about a tablespoon, right, both sides, and I'll knead that in. And once that's completely disappeared, I'll knead for about another minute. Then I'll usually give it a little more flour if it needs it, or if yours doesn't, don't. But mine was feeling just a little too soft and sticky. And once all that's been kneaded in, and it is soft and smooth again, we will introduce the last of the olive oil, and then same drill, just keep kneading and kneading. Again, only adding additional flour if it gets too impossible to work with. And after about 7 or 8 total minutes of kneading, you should have a very soft, supple, sticky, and incredibly sexy dough. It should be fairly elastic. If you poke your fingers and it just leaves a big dent, you need to work it a little more. But right there, mine was perfect. All right, at that point, we're going to take a bowl. We're going to drizzle in some olive oil. We're going to throw the dough in, drizzle over more olive oil. And I warned you about the olive oil. It's a recurring theme. So we're going to coat that generously. We're going to make sure the entire surface is totally covered. I'm going to pat that down a little bit. We're going to cover that with foil. We're going to let that rise in a warm
Saran wrap, not foil.
Or until it doubles.
Because you can't see it double.
The oven's off, of course. And mine took about an hour, 15 minutes. Yours might take 2 hours.
So when we prove it tomorrow, it's going to take at least about 20, 30 minutes. So we'll make that dough tomorrow, okay? We'll proof it for about 20 minutes, but you got to have a pan with hot water in it. It's going to accelerate the proofing method. If not, it's going to take longer to proof, okay?
There's who knows. But when you're done, it's going to look like this. Next, I want you to lightly oil a sheet pan with a little bit of olive oil.
Olive oil.
And then we're going to dump our dough on the pan.
Adequate amount.
And then we're going to press it down into sort of a rectangular shape. And the main purpose here is to knock out all the air.
And again, your sheet tray, cookie tray, or a cake pan needs to be small enough to fit that dough, okay?
So really press it down good. And don't worry about trying to get a perfect rectangle. Perfectly shaped focaccias are annoying. So just get it close. And then we're going to cover it loosely with plastic wrap and just let it rest for 15 minutes. So this is not really an extra rising. We're just going to let it sit covered for 15 or 20 minutes. And yes, it will rise up a little bit, but we were mostly just letting the dough relax. And at that point, yes, you guessed it, more olive oil. We're going to drizzle on olive oil all over the surface. We're going to spread it around lovingly with our fingertips. And then, for by far the best part of the entire recipe, the dotting of the dough. Although I really don't like that term, it's more of a poke. All right, so you're going to take between 1 and 5 fingers and press them into the dough all over. And we're not just making some shallow depressions. I want full penetration. I want those fingertips going all the way down to the pan. So I'll usually do it with multiple fingers first, and then start hunting and pecking with one finger, looking for spots I missed. And not only is this pushing more olive oil into the dough, which is going to create an even better texture, but it's also going to cook faster and more evenly, because we'll have a more efficient transfer of heat. And once we have an absolute and complete poking of the surface, I'm going to go ahead and put that back in the oven. Again, the oven's off. This is just for rising. And we're going to let that proof for about 45 minutes or until it looks like that. It should just about double in size, and it should look incredibly interesting. People that don't cook don't get to see things like this. I mean, how sad is that? So maybe if you do make this, invite a friend over who you think has never baked in their life and watch their face light up. That's a fun thing to do once in a while. Now at this point, you're going to preheat your oven to 475 because we are in the final stages. So to finish this off, I'm going to sprinkle the top with some more finely minced rosemary. And then, yes, you guessed it, one last olive oil application. But this time you got to be really careful. I'm just dripping a little bit, brushing it very, very lightly. I'm just using the tips of the brush. And yes, a little bit of olive oil will well up in those little dimples. Perfectly normal and desirable. And then last but not least, traditionally these are dusted with some sea salt. And you want to use something that has a nice big flake to it. And because it is such a large grain salt, it looks like we're putting on a ton, but it's really not that much. So give it a decent sprinkling with the sea salt. And then you're going to pop that in your very well preheated 475 degree oven for 15 minutes or until it looks like this. I'm predicting it's going to be golden brown and incredibly gorgeous.
Darker than that, that's too light.
Patting each other on the back. Let's go ahead and take a brush, and while it's warm, brush on just a little more olive oil. And I know what you're thinking, we've already applied olive oil 5 times. Do we really need it applied a 6th time?
Yes.
Yes, yes you do. And at that point, we're going to simply transfer that to a cooling rack. And when it's cooled down, you're ready to cut into one of the world's great breads. So let me cut this up, and you can see that beautiful, beautiful texture. That olive oil drenched surface is a little bit flaky, a little bit crusty. And inside it's going to be incredibly light, incredibly tender, with just a beautiful, rich taste and texture. And it's funny, I always get like a buttery flavor from focaccia, which is weird because there's no butter in it. But it really does have that kind of richness to it. So really, really nice. Of course, you can make an amazing sample.
So that's your focaccia for tomorrow. Okay, it doesn't need to be fermented overnight. We'll go ahead and bloom the yeast in warm water, cover it, let it foam up, and then add your dried ingredients like you saw there. Shape that dough, proof it in an oil bowl. Take it again, shape it on the sheet tray with olive oil at the bottom, olive oil on top. Puncture it, wrap it, and proof it again. Okay, more olive oil, and it goes in the oven at 475. And it's supposed to be nice and golden brown, not that pale. That is like pale color. It needs to be more golden brown. We'll take it out, let it cool down, and cut it. That's for the 0-0 flour, the recipe I just gave you guys. The one for the next tomorrow, so for Wednesday, is the Polish method. We're gonna make the Polish on tomorrow, and then we're gonna use that for make it for the focaccia again on Wednesday. So we're making focaccia ×2. Okay, so that's another method. Okay. Let me go back and let's take a look at the what is it, the soft yeasty dinner rolls. Okay, where are we at? No baguettes. These are going to be the same as the milk bread. Okay. Oh, sorry, I thought I sent it to everybody. The first one. There we go. Now everybody got both videos, okay? Milk bread, soft yeasty dinner roll. Same concept, but one has no milk, okay? And this is a technique when you're shaping these dinner rolls with your hand, okay? This is for the milk bread. Now we're gonna only use the technique for the soft yeasty dinner rolls, okay? Window pane. That is one way to roll your rolls. The other way is so when you got the log, you cut into the individual portions. We're gonna make a little, grab the first piece, roll it into a ball, and then cover with your hand. So here's your countertop, the dough on the inside, I mean, on top of your countertop, and your hand like a cage on top of your dough ball. You're gonna roll it back and forth, back and forth. You're gonna feel that dough inside the palm of your hand, go around and around between your palm of your hand and inside your fingers. When you feel it nice and round, then you remove your hand, you got a nice little roll, okay? And I'll give you guys a demo of that tomorrow. Soft yeast dinner rolls for tomorrow. So you got two focaccias and soft yeast dinner rolls for tomorrow, okay? Not that hard, but they're gonna take some time. Let me go. Here we go, day 13. So let's go over Wednesday. Like I said, it's gonna be kind of a short day, okay? No, that's Wednesday, that's 11/12. Yeah, Tuesday. Sorry, my bad, Tuesday, not Wednesday, not yet. Tuesday. Or is it Wednesday? Wednesday, right? Yeah, Wednesday, my bad. I get confused. So Wednesday, okay? Focaccia, a little history about both. Focaccia in Italy, they like you saw, they use adequate amount of olive oil to preserve that bread, okay? A lot of humidity in Italy, so that olive oil preserves it, doesn't let it go mold or spoil bad, gives it a longer shelf life. What are you doing, s'mores? What are you lighting up? Oh, okay. Like you got chocolate and cookies, those s'mores too?
The candle.
All right. So I just got distracted. What? All right.
Sorry.
Never mind. Anyways, so that's why focaccia, we use a lot of olive oil to preserve, give it a longer shelf life. Okay. And that's why those dimples are so important for the olive oil to go in it and preserve it a little bit longer. Okay. So a little bit of history of focaccia and baguettes. Okay. All about the French baguette, cultural icon. No French or lunch or supper will be complete without a crusty baguette. Okay. So in France, you go to the store, the little street cars, you buy a baguette, they hand you the baguette unwrapped. Okay, unwrapped. They just give you this log of baguette. Okay, you take it, you wrap it on butcher's paper, you take it home, put it on the table, and they tear it apart. They don't slice it all nice and neatly and nice. They just tear it. Whatever's left, they throw it in the trash. Okay, that's how the French eat the baguette. Okay. So think of France, you can't help but think of the crusty baguette, split into two and stuff it with creamy camembert or meaty pate. Love pate. Spread with dollops of butter and homemade jam, or dunk in bowls of coffee, or cut into some crusty hunks of lightly toasted to accompany French onion soup. Oh yeah. The long, thin Latin loaf has been a quintessential part of French daily life since the 18th century. Humble beginnings. Several theories of the origins of the French baguette. According to one legend, Napoleon Bonaparte, a little short bastard, anyways, decreed that bread should be made long, thin sticks in order to fit into the pockets of his soldiers. That's the whole thing behind baguettes, okay? Another much loved myth says that when work began in Paris Metro in 1898, laborers were brought in from all over the France to work in the groundbreaking project. Because of violent arguments between the different groups of men, bakers were asked to create bread that could be torn rather than cut, so the knives could be outlawed. Again, that's what they're tearing to it. One final theory suggests that the iconic Gaelic bread was the cause of the French Revolution, since the bread was the mainstay of the French diet, and peasants rioted on the side of the nobility eating the crusty white sticks while they faced shortages and famine. Whether or not the baguette caused the fall of the Bastille in 1793, the post-revolution government decried richness and poverty must both disappear from the government of equality. Okay, there will no longer be a bread of wheat for the rich and the bread for the barn for the poor. All bakers will be held under the penalty of imprisonment to make only one type of bread, the bread of equality, baguette. Law of the land. Over the following decades, as wheat became cheaper, baguettes were common sight, and foreign visitors remarked on the size of the iconic breadsticks. Housemaids were hurrying homeowners with the purchase of various Gaelic breakfasts, and the long sticks of bread and the yard or two in length, carrying in their arms, made an odd impression of this guy, the writer. An American visitor commented, in order to control this excesses, in 1920, a law decreed that iconic loaves should have minimum weight about 80 grams and a maximum length about 40 centimeters. The first piece of official baguette legislation acknowledgement the importance of the baguette as a part of the French lifestyle. Now, no one really knows who invented the modern day baguette, but it is said that a man who invented the croissant, Vienna-born baker August Zang, facilitated the loaf's creation by installing France's first steam oven, which made it possible to bake loaves with a crisp crust and a fluffy center. In the Boulanger Benoist 92 in Paris in 1839. Later in the 1920s, the law passed forbidding bakers to do any work before 4 a.m. since the long, thin baguettes could be prepared and baked more quickly than the larger loaves. It wasn't only bread that bakers could prepare for the time of breakfast. You guys know the history of the croissants? Do you guys know who created the croissants? Anyone know? Croissants, the French were not the inventors of croissants. They did not create the croissants. The Turkish invented the croissants. What do you guys think is that? What's in the Turkish?
I didn't hear you.
Huh?
What did you say? Who invented it?
Yeah, the Turkish, not the Frenchmen.
They're good.
You guys know why the Turkish were the inventors of the croissants? Their flag has a crescent moon, right? They invented the croissant to warn that the enemy was coming. Hence, the croissant became a symbol of their flag to warn that the enemy was coming without making so much noise. And that's who invented the croissant in shape of a crescent moon, not the French. Okay, just FYI, a little history. Okay. Again, daily bread, the baguette, the tradition Francois, is made with a lightly yeasty dough, which is kneaded and folded. The surface is slashed, then it is left to rise in the basket line with couches or cloths. They bake in a special oven containing the baguette-shaped perforated molds. Subway has those molds, and they have that cloth too. If you go to Subway and go to the line and you pick whatever bread you want, they have it into the nice little molds with the cloths. There are plenty of baguette spin-offs too, including the thinner tube shape called flute, and the even thinner version called ficelle. There's also a short and stubby version of the baguette known as baton. Used to signal Frances in countless movies, the crusty stick of bread has starred alongside movie idols ranging from Brigitte Bardot to Gerard Depardieu and Liam Neeson. Like many actors, however, this culinary star of French kitchens will never go out of fashion. Okay. Focaccia, a little history about focaccia. Focaccia is one of the most irresistible classic Italian recipes. It was first made popular in Italy when a traveler then traveled wherever Italian settlers formed communities all over the world. Focaccia bread is usually flat, relatively plain, which makes it highly versatile and is often topped with olive oil and herbs or sliced olives traditionally. But the numerous modern takes of this delicious treat, it goes great with delicious Italian cheese. To learn more about the history of focaccia, we're going to read on later. The birth of focaccia. Many historians believe that focaccia was born either in Etruscans or North Italy in the days before the Roman Empire and long before the ancient Greece at the beginning of the first millennium. However, the flat, unleavened bread was popular throughout the world, especially the Middle East, for so long that the definitely saying that who invented the focaccia is impossible, but it does have a long history of Turkey, Italy, Greece, France, and Spain. Early focaccia, while the original focaccia was 11, the recipe does rise naturally with the right climate and geographic climate. The bread rises on its own. This led many to believe that it was initially made, as we know today, by those who in the mountains inland Mediterranean Sea. So what's in the name? The name is this tasty bread is derived from the Roman words panis focaccius, one key name, Savior's bread. Simply translate for the fireplace bread at the center of the bread. Linguistics believe that this refers to how the bread was originally made over the ashes of a fireplace at the center of early homes. The spread of focaccia, Romans took the recipe with them through France and Spain and throughout the empire. Since the medieval era, the Roman Catholic Church was used as bread commonly during the religious festivals. And of course, 20th century Italian immigrants to the U.S. brought their recipes with them, leading to the popularity of many classic Italian recipes and traditions. Your menu for Wednesday. You're going to finish that focaccia you started on Tuesday, that foolish, okay? And you're going to make baguette. We're going to make it the day of and bake it the day of, okay? So focaccia, again, it's all about those dimples. It's all about having about this thick of bread, that golden brown on the bottom, golden brown on top, a lot of olive oil in the sheet tray, a lot of olive oil in the dough, a lot of olive oil on top of the focaccia. When you cut it and squeeze it, it needs to be saturated with olive oil. You're going to squeeze the olive oil out of it, okay? And we're going to make baguettes on that day too, okay? So the baguette recipe is easy, guys, okay? But there's two ways you can do the baguettes in the oven, okay? So first we're going to get the focaccia out of the way, and then we're going to roll out the baguette, okay? First, when we finish the focaccia bread dough, well, it's proof it, make the baguette dough, bring out the focaccia, shape it, proof it, bring out the baguette, shape it, proof it, bake the focaccia, get it out, and then go with the baguette afterwards, okay? Because the baguette, if you got a spray bottle, those of you guys have a cat, know what I'm talking about, right? A spray bottle, right? You spray your cat when he's being naughty. I know, I used to do that. Like, yeah, just for the fun of it. Come on, Eddie. Anyways, you're going to spray that baguette with water on the crust. You're going to open up your oven and spray the baguette. That's one way to do so. The other way is to grab a pan of ice, and before the baguette goes in it, put the pan of ice in the oven. That steam is going to create a nice crust on the outside of the baguette, okay? So baguettes and focaccia on Wednesday, okay? Let's take a look at baguettes. Where are we? Baguettes, okay? Baguettes by hand and baguettes in the mixer. Okay, we're going to do them by hand, okay? Where are we? Here we go, okay? Let me get that copy.
Alex M. on Nespresso Virtuo, in his own words. That is love. One taste and you'll discover.
All right.
Let's make sure we have our pen.
Baguettes.
Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with
Yeah, Chef
how
John.
to make perfect French baguette at home. That's right, I've gotten so many food wishes for this over the years, and I would always reply to the person, you know what, you really can't make great French baguette.
So when you make the baguette, you're going to make the dough, right? You can split into 4 equal parts or split it into 1/2 part. It depends how much the recipe you're going to make. When you make that dough, you're going to roll it into a log, okay? And then you're going to keep on rolling it. So you're going to put your hands like this, like you're going to pray, and then press it down with this part of your hands. Press it out and outwards, okay? Roll it back, okay? That's why we're shipping the baguette, okay?
At home. And I would list all the reasons, like the flour and the water and the steam injected oven. But that was before I actually tried it. But once I did, I realized I was wrong again. So I'm going to show you how to make Parisian bakery quality baguette in your very own home. And I think you're going to be fairly shocked at just how simple this is. So we're going to start with our French bread dough. We're going to use our famous no-knead method, which means we're going to start off with a very small amount of yeast. That's just a 1/4 teaspoon. We're going to throw that in a mixing bowl along with some room temperature water. We don't need warm water for this. I'm going to give that a little stir, but we don't need to let this sit like we usually do. We don't need this or even want this to start rising quickly. So quick stir. I'm also going to add in some salt. And then, of course, the last ingredient, flour. And I'm not even using bread flour for this. We're just going to use regular all-purpose flour. And we're going to dump that in, and we're going to take a wooden spoon, and we're going to mix that up. And at first, you're going to think, wow, this is way too wet. And then as you continue stirring, you're going to think, man, this is way too dry. But then that'll pass, and you'll realize this is going to be perfect. And as you keep stirring and stirring, you're going to get a super thick, super sticky dough that will eventually pull all the flour away from the sides. Okay, so just use your wooden spoon to work that lump of dough against the sides of the bowl. And if you measure all the ingredients by weight, which I'm going to insist you do, that's exactly what it should look like. All right, very moist, very, very, very sticky. But again, it does come together enough to pull away from the sides of the bowl. That's kind of important. All right, once we get to that stage, we're going to stop, and then we'll simply wrap this in plastic, throw a towel over it. That really is mostly for looks. And I'm going to put that inside a turned off oven for 12 to 14 hours or until it doubles in size. And if it happens a little sooner, that's fine. If it takes a little longer, that's fine. But basically, it should resemble this. This is what mine looked like after 12 hours. And then we're going to take a spatula and kind of knock the air out of this. You can see just how sticky and wet and elastic that is. I probably should have floured the spatula, but it's too late. But basically, we're just going to knock the air out of that dough by scraping it out. And we're going to do so onto a very well-floured work surface. So sprinkle a good amount of flour down first. We're also going to want to dust them over the top, as well as have our hands very well floured. And I keep stressing it, but this dough is very sticky and has to stay that way. So I just want you to use the minimum amount of flour you need to work with this. And all we're going to do is pat that down into a rectangle. All right, the primary reason is to knock.
And this is bread flour, okay?
Knock all the air out, but it also will give us a shape that we can cut into 4 relatively even size pieces. And of course you could weigh these and get them perfectly even, but I can't even pretend to care about stuff like that. You think I'm scared of baguettes that aren't all the same size? I don't think so. So we're going to divide that up into 4 pieces to make our loaves. But before we start shaping that, let's make sure we have our pan ready. So I have a half sheet pan with a baking mat on it that I'm going to dust with cornmeal. So that's prepped and ready for our loaves. So let's get shaping. And that is going to be extremely easy because all we're going to do is take one of those pieces of dough and we'll give it a little dusting of flour. Again, we're using the minimum we can get away with. And I'm basically just going to roll it up like that. And then I'm simply going to roll it with my fingers like this, starting in the center and kind of rolling and stretching it out towards the ends. And in just a few short seconds, you're going to have something that looks like that. And that's really all that's necessary. Now, if you have any obvious seams, put those underneath. But even that's not a big deal because once this rises, it's going to look awesome. And once our dough's been rolled out into a cylinder or something like that, we're going to transfer that onto our baking sheet. And if you need to even it out a little bit, you can do that here, but don't worry too much about it. Like I said, when this rises, it's going to look amazing. Plus that little bit of texture on the surface and those slight inconsistencies in the girth are all going to add to that authentic French baguette appearance. And once those are panned up, one little quick optional step, I do like to take a damp piece of paper towel and just kind of wipe off the excess cornmeal. This is going to go in a super hot oven, like 550, and that extra stuff could smoke in the oven. And then we're going to give the tops of our loaves a generous dusting of flour, and then very, very, very lightly drape this with plastic wrap. And then once those are covered, we're going to let those rise for about an hour to an hour and a half, or until just about doubled in size. And I will admit, halfway through, I got totally paranoid my plastic was going to stick. So I decided to dust it very generously with flour, and I put that back on there, and I felt better. So why don't you just flour your plastic wrap to begin with? But bottom line, we're going to leave those loaves to rise. And this is what mine looked like when they were done. It was kind of chilly in my kitchen that day, so this took about an hour and a half. Oh, by the way, you've probably noticed I'm just doing 2 loaves here. This recipe makes 4 small baguettes or 2 regular size ones. But since for most of you this will be the largest pan you can get a hold of, we're going to do it this way. So I'm going to cook 2. I'll cook the other 2 later. And at this point, we are finally ready to bake. So we're going to preheat our oven to 550 or as high as your oven will go. And we're also on the bottom rack going to put a pan of water that's going to keep the oven.
Pan of ice is better, okay? Right before the baguette goes in the oven to bake.
Nice and humidified, which is going to be critical to get that authentic crust. So our oven's preheating and it's on to the last official step. We have to take a razor and make some slashes in the dough. But we're not going to use a razor. We're going to use scissors. It's so much easier. So take some scissors, hold them straight up and make a 45-degree cut. But the only problem with the scissor method is it does leave these little sharp tips, which you got to poke down. I mean, that's one of the first sayings you learn in baguette school. If you're going to snip, you got to tuck the tip. All right, so remember that. So we're going to poke those down. And I said that was the last step, but really this is the last official step. Before these go in the oven, we got to take a spray bottle and we got to give these a nice misting. Make sure the surface of both loaves are covered. And by the way, keep that spray bottle close to you. We're going to use that again. And at that point, we're going to place it in our preheated oven, and we're going to bake that at 550 degrees for about 15 minutes or until done. But don't go anywhere. We got stuff to do. After 5 minutes of baking, I want you to quickly open up the oven door and give both loaves a really quick spray. Quickly close the door back up. So that's the first spray, about 4 or 5 minutes in. And then we're going to do one more spray after about 10 minutes. And while we do this second spray, we're also going to give the pan a turn just so it cooks nice and evenly. And by the way, at this point, do not worry if it looks ugly. It's going to look a little spotty. Do not be scared. Because like 4 or 5 minutes later, when you pull these out, after about 15 minutes total cooking time, you're going to be looking at a couple incredibly gorgeous and absolutely authentic French baguettes. I mean, check those out. And I know those look so très magnifique, you want to eat it right away, but you can't. You have to let this cool. Put them on a rack until they completely cool. Do not cut these hot. Do not cut these warm. But after they're cooled down, you're going to take a serrated knife and you're going to hear something that sounds like this. Oh yeah. In fact, I can say you can tell how good a baguette's going to taste by the sound. I totally agree with that. And this did not disappoint. It just came out absolutely perfect. That thin, crispy, crusty exterior, and the inside's very tender, very light, while at the same time they have that signature chewiness that the baguettes are known for. And of course, the only way to make this any better or any more French would be to put some butter on it. So we're going to burr that up and continue to enjoy what is truly.
Also, when you slice it thinly, hold that piece of sliced bread into your nose and breathe through it like an air filter. You're going to be able to breathe and smell the flavors of the salt and also the yeast. And it's going to, now you can tell how, when you breathe through it, through your nose, you're going to be able to tell that baguette is going to have good and great flavors, okay? That's another way of testing it. So that's one kind of baguette technique, okay? This is another one of baguette technique. Where is he at? This guy's a crackpot too.
An interesting way. Hi there, welcome to The Real Deal. Today I'm going to show you an interesting way of making your own French baguette at home. A low-speed mixing cold fermented baguette recipe. The easiest process to fit family's busy schedule. Let's get started. Pour water first into your mixer bowl. Add flour, salt, semolina, and yeast, and mix on low speed for 15 minutes. Then transfer dough into a greased plastic container and let dough rise at room temperature for about an hour. When the dough has doubled in volume, deflate and round dough into a smooth ball. Place the dough into the same bowl, cover, and refrigerate overnight. After the resting time, put the cold fermented dough on your work surface to come back to temperature for about an hour. Cold resting dough is also a practical matter. Once the dough is mixed and resting for 14 hours or more, it is not a big deal, and once it is pulled out, it takes a couple of hours to get it done. Transfer the dough to a lightly floured surface without deflating it yet, and divide it into 3 7.5-ounce equal pieces. Flip over dough skin side down. Gently deflate and fold each piece of dough down into a rectangle shape. Cover bread with a wet kitchen towel and let rest for 45 minutes at room temperature. Bread is alive. Beautiful. After the resting time, shape each piece into a 16-inch length baguette, the size of your baking tray, starting with the first one you shaped. To shape a baguette, it is not complicated.
See, this is a different way of shaping the baguette with the palm of your hand down, pressing it and sealing the seams.
Give a gentle patting, folding and pressing with the heel of your hand as if you were folding a business letter. Elongate each baguette by rolling it back and forth on the work surface with both hands over the center of the loaf and work them out to the ends until the baguette reaches the desired length. Arrange baguette seam side down, cover with a wet kitchen towel, and let proof for about an hour or until it has almost doubled in size. The last step before baking is to slash the tops of the baguette. Then carefully
What he's making here is EPIs, E-P-I-S. Okay.
slide the non-stick baking mat onto the hot baking tray or stone and throw a few ice cubes for the steam and bake bread for about 20
So the middle ones are EPIs. Okay.
minutes. Smelling bread coming out of your oven will make your day. And by the way, like professional, if you use baker's couche, flax linen proofing cloth, and if you want to be more creative, roll shaped baguette in a damped, clean kitchen towel and coat them with sesame seeds or poppy seeds. This is going to be something. Look at that. Crusty, creamy crumb, and so much flavors. Homemade French baguette made easy. I am Bruno Albuz. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.
Yeah, he's a little bit crazy. So Bruno Abus, baguettes, two different techniques. One you roll it, and one you fold it down with the seam down, okay? But again, both, when you bake it, pan of ice and a spray bottle to spray the top so it has a nice crust on it. And we're not gonna let it ferment for an hour, 2 hours. And again, the best way to ferment it is if you're not using your oven or you're not using a cabinet that is nice to seal, put it again with a nice pan of hot water. That steam is gonna make it proof faster, okay? So that's what we have Tuesday and Wednesday. Any thoughts so far, Tuesday and Wednesday? Baguettes and more baguettes, right? I'm not going to go into Thursday because we got more bread to bake on Thursday, but I will go over the menu on Thursday, what's happening Thursday, okay? Because I know your shopping list has both items, has everything for this week, okay? And again, it's just your typical flour and what have you not, okay? So let's go take a look at your shopping list, see what it says for week 3, okay? Because week 3 is going to come and go really fast, okay? Week 3 shopping list, let's see what it says, okay? No proteins, because we're not cooking any chicken, fish, shrimp, or pork. Yes, you are going to need milk for the milk bread. You are going to need eggs as well too, especially for the egg wash, the challah bread, and you are going to need butter, okay? Produce, none, unless you want to buy some cherry tomato, some rosemary for your focaccia bread, any toppings for your focaccia bread. Dry ingredients, you got bread flour, 6 pounds, sugar, 8 ounces, yeast, 4 ounces. You'll definitely gonna need more yeast than 4 ounces, trust me. Salt, shortening, olive oil, rosemary, parchment paper, maple syrup, vegetable oil, aluminum terrine or pan for your bread loaf, okay? That's what it has on the shopping list. Let's take a look at the recipes real quick, see what they have, okay? So we know for a fact that tomorrow you're baking soft yeasty rolls and you're also making focaccia. Okay, let's take a look at the soft yeasty roll recipe, see what it has and how much amount it costs, because I say you're gonna need a lot more yeast than that, okay? Let me zoom in, okay? So yeast, you need about 8 grams. Bread flour for your soft yeasty dinner rolls, salt, sugar, non-fat milk solids or powder milk. See, your shopping list didn't have any dry milk, okay? So you got to make sure that you put it on your shopping list. Add it to it. Okay. Non-fat milk solids, also known as powdered milk. Shortening and butter. Okay. So powdered milk is on the shopping list. Add it to it. Okay. Focaccia. You need flour. Okay. Bread flour for the Polish, and if you can get your hands on some 00 flour, do so. I haven't shown you the 00 flour, okay, yet. Water, yeast, okay. This is for your Polish, for the sponge. 225 milligrams of flour, 175 grams of water. Cold water is fine, and yeast, 1.5 grams of water. You're gonna mix this right here. You're gonna make that Polish, okay. That biga, whatever it's called, biga Polish, pate fermented, the sponge. You're going to make the sponge tomorrow and leave it for Wednesday, okay? And then for Wednesday's recipe, you need the flour, water, yeast, more yeast, salt, olive oil, rosemary, and salt. That is for to finish your focaccia dough, okay? And I already gave you the recipe for ingredients for tomorrow's focaccia. You're making 2 focaccias. One's tomorrow, the recipe I gave you in the slide, and one is this one for Wednesday, okay? So again, like I said, a lot of yeast. So that's the menu for tomorrow: soft yeast dinner rolls and focaccia times 2. One Polish, one is not. Now you know you need dried powder milk. Let's take a look at Wednesday. Okay, baguettes, and again you got the recipe for focaccia. Baguettes, the same concept. You're going to need yeast, flour, water, and salt. Okay, it does call for 500 grams of flour, 5 grams of yeast, 15 grams of sea salt, and 300 grams of water. So flour, yeast, main ingredients, okay? Let's take a look at, again, let's go take a look at day 14, that is Thursday, because this shopping list for the whole entire week. Day 14, you're making challah bread, okay? And you're gonna make more baguette, and you're gonna make the blitz dough, okay? Blitz dough. Blitz dough is butter and flour, okay? And of course, yeast. So this is your challah bread. Again, more flour, 300 grams of bread flour, 4 grams of yeast. Like I said, you are going to need quite a bit of yeast, water, egg yolks, vegetable oil, sugar, and salt, okay? And then again, you got the ingredients for the baguette. Okay. And then blitz dough, it's on page 1007 of your own cooking book. Okay. Let's take a look at that book, see what the recipe has. Okay. 1007. Okay. That recipe for your blitz dough has, okay, bread flour, 250 grams, pastry flour, 250 grams, butter, 500 grams, salt, 8 grams, cold water, 250 grams. Pastry flour, you're not going to be able to find it. It is a combination of AP flour and cake flour. It's 2 to 1, okay? 2 AP, 1 cake flour. That is your pastry flour. Okay, so mix it and then use whatever you need for your blitz dough. Okay, blitz dough is going to be for your palmiers on the next day. Okay, day 15. So challah, we're going to make that dough. You're going to make another baguette, and you're going to make that blitz dough day 14, which will be Wednesday next week. Okay, day 15 coming around the corner next week. You're making palmiers. You're going to finish the challah bread, and you're going to make milk bread, okay? And again, milk bread, this is your recipe for milk bread. Bread flour, 1,000 grams. Instant yeast, 30 grams. Milk, sugar, salt, eggs, butter, and barley malt syrup, okay? Everything's in your shopping list, but do make sure you adjust the amounts because you're going to need quite a bit of bread flour coming up, okay? You're going to need quite a bit of yeast as well coming up. Okay. Make sure you get your barley malt syrup in the store. Okay. That is your recipe shopping list, and this is your recipe ingredients for this week coming up and next week as well too. Okay. So again, adjust your recipe and make sure that your shopping list, and make sure that you do go out and buy that powdered milk. Okay, you're gonna need it. It's not on the shopping list, so make sure you add it to it. Powdered milk for the milk bread. Okay, that is what's coming up next week. So it's a lot of baking with this next 4 days. 2 days this week and 2 days next week. Okay. Any comments so far of what's coming up this week? Gotta take your time. You gotta bloom that. You gotta activate that yeast. Remember, the water needs to be between 90 to 110 degrees to activate that yeast. Even if it's active yeast, you still gotta activate it, because you'll never know if the yeast has been is dead, has been exposed to air. Once you open up your container with yeast, make sure you close it airtight, because the oxygen is going to kill it again. Okay. Any questions so far about what's coming up? Okay. And again, your recipe for the blitz dough is in your book, page 1007. Take a look at it and make sure the ingredients are there on your shopping list. Make sure you have the right amount. Make sure you have your butter. Make sure you got your ingredients, because we're going to make palmiers next week coming up. Okay. Those are usually made with puff pastry, but we don't have time for that. Okay. So that's what's coming up ahead, guys. Next week. Any thoughts on next week? Well, this week and next week. No. What else we got? Okay. And we're gonna go over about laminated doughs next week on Monday's lecture. I'm gonna show you how the different folds are gonna be like. How to fold it. There's two different kinds of folds. There's a book fold and there's the envelope fold. The book fold is for croissants, and the envelope fold is for puff pastry. They're different kinds of folds. Okay, each one is designated for one. So we're going to be using the envelope fold for your your blitz dough coming up for the palmiers. Okay, again, short day, short week. Okay,